Welcome to The Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into what seems like a global success story that, once you really dig in, starts to look a lot more like a huge hidden failure.
That's right.
We're talking about the global metrics for access to safe drinking water, specifically the ones tied to the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs.
And the official story, the one based on the standard they used for years, was that the world had pretty much met its target for drinking water.
Which sounds fantastic.
It does. But the research we're looking at today completely challenges that. It suggests that by focusing only on, let's say, infrastructure.
On pipes and wells.
Exactly.
Yep.
By focusing only on that, the official numbers overlooked more than 1 billion people. People who were getting water that just wasn't safe to drink.
Over 1 billion. That shift in understanding is really our mission for this deep dive.
Right.
We need to unpack this difference between an improved water source, which is an infrastructure metric, and actually having safe water.
Which is a whole different ballgame. It means quality testing, risk assessment.
We're moving the conversation from counting pipes to, well, testing for pathogens.
And to do that, you have to start with the old rules.
Right. So let's get into the standard that was used for years by the WHO and UNICEF, their joint monitoring program, the JMP. The MDG indicator was incredibly simple on the surface. It was just the proportion of households using water from an improved source. So what did improved actually mean in practice?
The JMP method was really built around 2 buckets, improved and unimproved. That's it.
Simple enough.
And the improved sources were all about infrastructure that, in theory, should protect the water. So you're thinking of piped water to your house, protected dug wells, boreholes, rainwater systems.
Things with a cover on them, basically.
Basically, yeah. The whole idea was structural. If the source was physically shielded from outside contamination, it was, assumed to be safe.
And the unimproved sources were the really obvious ones, I assume.
The obvious ones. Surface water, so rivers, streams, unprotected wells, and then water from, like, carts or tankers, which is notoriously unreliable.
At first glance, that seems like a pretty reasonable way to categorize things. You're assessing risk based on the setup.
It was a necessary proxy, but it had a really fundamental flaw. The JMP indicator basically conflated access to a type of machine with the actual use of safe water.
Ah.
They classified sources based on whether they were built to be protected, but they didn't, and this is the key, they didn't consistently monitor the actual quality of the water that people were drinking.
So the metric was based on an ideal, an aspiration, not on actual, biological proof.
Exactly. And to be fair to them, they were kind of stuck.
How so?
When the MDGs were first being put together, that kind of national scale water quality data, it just didn't exist for most of the world. They had to use source type as a stand-in, as a proxy for safety.
But that proxy is fragile.
Extremely. It means any breakdown, any lack of maintenance, poor sanitation nearby, a failure in governance, any of that, and the official statistics immediately become wrong. And that's the gap this new research wanted to fill.
Okay, so if the old metric wasn't working, the researchers had to find a new way. How did they adjust those estimates? How do you move from just classifying sources to getting real hard testing data? That sounds expensive.
It is. It's complex. They needed real, nationally representative data, and they used, the only studies with that kind of scope available at the time.
Which were?
They were called the Rapid Assessment of Drinking Water Quality Studies, or RADWQ for short.
RADWQ, okay.
And they're conducted in 5 really diverse countries: Ethiopia, Jordan, Nicaragua, Nigeria, and Tajikistan.
And from that data, they made 2 big adjustments to the JMP's numbers.
2 critical adjustments. Yeah, the first one was for microbial contamination. They went out and tested water sources for thermotolerant coliform bacteria, or TTC.
And TTC is not good.
Not good at all. It's a really strong indicator of fecal contamination. A source was only counted as safe if it tested negative, so less than 1 TTC per 100 milliliters. It's a very, very strict line.
No wiggle room. And the second adjustment?
That one tackled sanitary risk. So even if a source tested clean on that one particular day,
it might not be clean tomorrow.
Precisely. So they put each source through a standardized sanitary inspection. They were looking for physical risk factors for future contamination.
What kind of things?
Things you might expect. Breaks in the pipes, poor drainage around the well, or maybe the well is just too close to a latrine or to animal waste.
It's the difference between saying this glass of water is clean right now versus this whole system is secure enough to keep it clean.
You've got it. They defined what they called elevated sanitary risk as having more than 2 of these common problems. And the data was clear. The DTC contamination, the actual fecal matter, It went up dramatically as the sanitary risk increased.
So the system failures weren't just a possibility, they were a predictor.
A very strong one.
That makes the data from those 5 countries really powerful. But how do you extrapolate that to the whole world? I mean, you can't just average the results from Nicaragua and Nigeria and say that's the global total, right?
That's an excellent question and a huge methodological hurdle. They knew they couldn't just do that, so they used some pretty sophisticated statistical modeling, specifically principal components analysis.
Okay, PCA. In simple terms.
Think of it less like averaging and more like profiling. It's a way to group and predict outcomes based on shared national traits.
What kind of traits are we talking about?
They realized that a country's ability to keep its water safe isn't random. It's tied to national capacity. So they looked at widely available data like GDP, government effectiveness, the Human Development Index.
Things that measure how well a country is functioning overall.
Exactly. They built a global model where, say, a high GDP country with strong governance was predicted to have a similar safety profile to the tested countries that also had strong profiles. It was a model of a government's ability to maintain safety, not just its ability to build infrastructure.
That is a critical distinction. It shifts the entire focus from construction to governance to upkeep.
It does.
So let's get to the payoff. The numbers. The revised reality of water access after all these adjustments.
This is where the story completely flips. If we look at the data for 2010.
Okay, 2010. The official JMP estimate, the one based only on infrastructure, said that 783 million people were using unimproved sources.
Right, which was about 11% of the world's population.
But the study's estimate, after accounting for fecal contamination,
It suggested 1.8 billion people were using unsafe water. That's 28% of the global population.
wait, 1.8 billion?
Billion. The number of people without safe water more than doubled.
That means, my God, over 1 billion people who the world was counting as a success story
People using an improved source.
were actually drinking contaminated water. That's not a small error. That's a staggering failure of measurement.
And it completely moves the goalposts for the MDGs. The 1990 baseline for people without safe water jumped from 23% to 37%. So instead of claiming victory in 2015,
This target was actually missed.
by a lot, the study projected an 8 percentage point shortfall. That's 680 million people who were left behind, even with the infrastructure in place.
And that's just based on the one contamination test. What happens when you bring in that other factor, the sanitary risk assessment?
It gets even worse. If you use the strictest definition of safe, so the water has to be uncontaminated and have low sanitary risk.
No ticking time bombs.
Right. Then the number of people using unsafe water jumps to 3 billion.
3 billion.
Yes. An extra 1.2 billion people were getting water from sources that, while maybe clean that day, were at high risk of being contaminated at any moment.
So we've shifted from a problem of not enough wells to a much harder problem of poorly managed systems and constant risk.
And that brings us to the really critical context,
Yeah.
which is that even these massive numbers are probably underestimates,
How could they be underestimates?
because the researchers had to make a few assumptions that, if anything, are optimistic.
Tell us about those. What are the unseen dangers?
The biggest one is what happens after the water leaves the source. It's called post-source contamination.
You mean in the bucket on the way home?
Exactly. The study had to assume that no contamination happened between the well and the cup. But anyone who works in this field knows that's where a lot of contamination happens. People carrying water in dirty containers, storing it improperly at home.
That's a huge variable, especially for any system that isn't piped directly into the house.
It's massive.
Yeah,
And the second issue is transient contamination.
meaning it comes and goes.
Exactly. The RADWQ study was a one-time snapshot test. But contamination can be sporadic. It might happen after a big flood or when the power goes out and a pump fails. A single test is unlikely to capture the true exposure someone has over an entire year.
So the day they tested, the water might have been fine, but the week before, it was dangerous.
Potentially, yes. And finally, the study only looked at a microbial indicator, TTC. It didn't account for chemical contaminants at all.
Things like arsenic or nitrates.
Right. Arsenic, fluoride, nitrates. All serious chronic health risks in many, many parts of the world. So we're still missing a huge piece of the unsafe water puzzle.
When you step back from it all, the main finding isn't just that the numbers were wrong, it's that the metric itself was wrong.
Yeah.
The sheer size of this gap between improved infrastructure and safe water shows that our global monitoring just wasn't incentivizing the right things.
It wasn't. It incentivized building things, not maintaining them.
Right.
The true challenge of water governance isn't the big capital investment to build the system. It's the long-term, often tedious work of continuous monitoring, routine maintenance, and making sure that infrastructure stays safe, day in, day out.
The NDGs maybe inadvertently rewarded the ribbon-cutting ceremony more than the long-term safety plan.
That's a very good way to put it.
It's just a profound lesson in how what you measure dictates what you do. If you only measure pumps installed, you only fund pump installation.
And this research really proves that getting a pipe or a well to everyone is only half the battle. The demand now for targeted evidence for effective policies that actually prioritize safety that has to rise to meet the infrastructure gains we've already made.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. If using the term improved access allowed global leaders to claim a victory and maybe shift attention away from the much harder work of water safety, what is the true cost of it? The cost in human health and economic loss and lost trust of relying on a metric that just doesn't capture reality? And what new metric could we possibly adopt that is so much harder